So I was originally going to make one big Puerto Rico travel video and recap our week on the island, but as I was going over the footage, it was clear that there was no way one video would be enough. It ended up being way too long, and some really crazy stuff happened at the end of our trip, which could really be its own video. So I'll probably end up making 2 to 3 videos on this trip, starting with this one, and then I'll have another video out sometime early next week. So make sure you're subscribed and have notifications enabled so you get notified when I upload those videos. That out the way, after the whole rental car debacle was settled, which you can find out about in my last video, our first day in Puerto Rico was pretty much chalk. We spent the day sleeping away and closed out the evening at Serafina Italian restaurant in Condado. Condado is this really trendy area full of high-rise condos, upscale shopping areas, as well as some nice dining options. While more expensive than the rest of the area, there's some nice fun to be had here. After our dinner, which was really great by the way, some of the best carbonara I've had in a really long time, we just headed back to our Airbnb and got an early night. The second day of our trip was really where things started. No trip to Puerto Rico is complete without a visit to its most famous attraction, El Morro. Built by the Spanish during colonial times, it was once a fort, now it's under the control of the U.S. National Park System. Word of warning, if you plan to visit this, which I highly recommend, there's about half a mile to 3/4 of a mile walk from the base of the street to El Morro's entrance. So if you're traveling with someone who's disabled or you're disabled yourself, keep that in mind. There's normally an admission fee, but we were able to get in for free with our military IDs, which is a reminder to always ask if places have military discounts. I'm really glad they did, as I really didn't find the place to be worth the admission costs, and I found it kind of empty and boring. There's a ramp which leads up to the top of the fort, but be warned, if you're with someone who's handicapped or disabled, it can be very difficult getting up there. And really, once you do get up there, it's not worth it in the first place. There's some nice views, but I didn't really find them to be worth effort, to be honest. After El Morro, we headed to El Plaza de Armas, which is basically the town center of Old San Juan. Most people will find themselves exploring this area for hours, and honestly for good reason. The blue cobbled streets and beautiful architecture are absolutely stunning. If you've been to the French Quarter in New Orleans, you'll find a lot of similarity. Personally, after spending many a days walking around the streets of Europe, Old San Juan didn't do too much for me. It kind of feels like a tourist trap area with a lot of gift shops and overpriced food. After I wandered around for an hour or so, I ended up going to check out El Jibarito restaurant, which if you're in Puerto Rico, you obviously have to try Mofongo, and this was one of the places that was recommended to me by my Uber driver. So I ended up walking to the place and was given a 25-minute wait. After I sat down, I saw that like most places these days, they only had QR menus. By this point, my phone was running low on battery, and I was also not getting any service because T-Mobile was garbage, and I highly recommend anyone who has them switch from them. But luckily, one of the employees was able to pull up the menu for me. I found the offerings to be kind of limited, and they were priced pretty high, so I went with a side order of Mofongo and an order of pastellitos. The pastellitos took a few minutes to come out, but the Mofongo took forever to come. Like, it was probably about 45 minutes to an hour from the time that I got my pastellitos. Like, after waiting 15 minutes for the server to come over, that was probably a couple minutes, and then it took like an hour for the Mofongo to come out. And by the time it did come out, I wasn't even really hungry anymore and was pretty annoyed. So I only ended up eating a little bit of the Mofongo before cashing out and just basically walking out of the place. But it basically tasted like mashed potatoes with plantain in it. So if you like mashed potatoes, imagine just mashed potatoes but with plantain instead of potatoes. That's kind of texture you have, and it probably would have tasted way better if I had some meat or something to go along with it, which is what you'll often see with Puerto Rican food. You'll usually see it accompanied with steak or shrimp. I didn't get that because I was cheap and didn't want to pay that much, so I really decided to just withhold judgment on Mofongo until I could try it later. After I left the restaurant, I linked back up with my family and we stopped at a few gift shops which had a pretty big selection. But I feel like with gift shops these days, you buy all this stuff and you bring it home, you pack your bags to the brim, and then you never use it or even look at it again. So it's pretty much just a waste of money. I think it's better to just take pictures and just soak in the experience of being in a different place and learning about the culture rather than wasting money on gift shop stuff. But to each their own. After that, we pretty much just went to get some pina coladas to end off the night. And obviously, if you're in Puerto Rico, you have to try the pina coladas because pina coladas are from Puerto Rico. They're originally made with a Puerto Rican rum called Don Q rum, which is a local Puerto Rican brand, like I said. So if you're visiting Puerto Rico, highly recommend you check out pina coladas with Don Q. Our plan was to start off day 3 of the trip around 9:30 in the morning so we could go to El Yunque and Luquillo's kiosks, which is where we were staying. And Luquillo is known for having these kiosks and this beachfront area where you can walk around and buy things. But my sister and nephews were pretty tired, so we ended up having a slower paced day at Luquillo Beach and the kiosks. Luquillo is located about 40 minutes from San Juan, is where our Airbnb was. What I loved about Luquillo's beaches as opposed to San Juan or other touristy areas is that it has a very local and family oriented atmosphere. You'll see lots of kids and their families out having a good time. So if you're traveling with children, this might be a place that you would look into staying or look into going to the beach because it's just a way relaxed and laid back vibe. Unfortunately, Luquillo tends to get a lot of rain, or at least it did when we were there. there. So not sure if that's because it's located near El Yunque, which is the rainforest, or if we were just extremely unlucky. But we had several downpours and some really bad rainstorms while we were there. Anyway, after we headed back to the Airbnb to freshen up a bit after the beach, we headed to the kiosk. The Luquillo kiosk is basically a strip set up full of clothing, food, and drink vendors. It's a really perfect complement to the nearby beach. There's so much to see, eat, and drink here, from pizza to Latin street foods to drinks. We had a blast. There's some souvenir shops as well. We didn't spend too much time there as we have a lot of trips coming up, and it's better to spend money on memories and experiences like I said before. The kiosk can get very packed, especially during the summer, so try to get here early if possible. After grabbing a chicken pastillito, I was ready to get out of there and head to dinner since it was my mom's birthday. She had a lot of fun showing off her tiara as well. After leaving the kiosk, we settled on Fogo de Chao in Old San Juan as a dinner spot for my mom. Ever since we went to Brazil in 2015, my mom has been craving a churrascaria, so we ended up going with the prainha there and enjoyed the large selections of sides and dishes that the restaurant offered. We had a blast. Definitely have to give a shout out to the staff as well, as they were really nice and ended up giving my mom and sister free desserts for the occasion. We called the night short though because we had a lot of ground to make up in day 4. Day 4 was easily one of the craziest days of traveling I've ever had in my life. The goal was to hit El Yunque and the bioluminescent bays of the island of Vieques. What a lot of people don't know is that Puerto Rico is actually a chain of multiple islands. So there's obviously the main island, but the beaches of Vieques in eastern Puerto Rico are famous for being one of the only places on earth to have bioluminescent bays. We started out early and headed to El Yunque, which was only a few minutes away from the Airbnb. As you'd expect from a rainforest, it was pouring down and I had to take cover under a canopy before I could head out to the visitor center. This is where we found out that in order to get into the park, you actually have to make a reservation online. I've never in my life heard of a park requiring that, but without a reservation, you're unable to access the waterfalls and the main areas of the park that you want to see. Pretty much only get access to a visitor center if you don't pre-order online. So I went online to try and make a reservation, but they were all booked up until August. As you can imagine, this was really disappointing as it's one of the biggest things to see in Puerto Rico, and I had really been excited for the past month to be able to check it out, but it is what it is. The craziness of day 4 was only just getting started though. After we missed out on El Yunque, we headed to Ceiba on the extreme eastern part of the island. From Ceiba, you can get the ferry to Vieques, and of course, just our luck, we missed out on all the ferries until 7 because we didn't make a reservation. So you're probably starting to see a theme about Puerto Rico at this point. I certainly was. Always check online to see if places require a reservation. We were able to book a spot on the 7 p.m. ferry, which returned at 1 in the morning. Perfect timing, at least we thought, to see the bioluminescent bays. By this time, we were pretty hungry though and stopped by a Mexican restaurant to get some food in nearby Luquillo. Puerto Ricans are a lot of things, but makers of good Mexican food, I would say, is not one of them. After we ate, we ended up heading back to the ferry station, which is only 20 or so minutes away. This is where things really became nightmarish. So there's no parking allowed near the terminal, even for handicapped people. They only have like these crazy 10-minute limit parking spots, and you have to drive like a mile down the road, pay $10 to park, and catch a shuttle back, kind of like at the airport. So after dropping my sister and her kids off, my mom and I drove to the parking lot, and we literally had to run to the shuttle, get to the shuttle, and are taken to the terminal. We're in line in perfect time, and after 5 minutes of waiting, when we get to the front of the line, the lady in broken English basically tells us that the ferry left. So as you can imagine, we were in disbelief and irate. We were arguing with the lady. We ended up going to customer service, who were initially no help at all, and were basically just saying, oh, well, you missed it, that's too bad. But after arguing for 20 minutes or so, they put us on a ferry leaving at 10 at night, which would not be returning until 6 in the morning, which was obviously crazy, but I really wanted to see those bioluminescent bays. I'd already missed El Yunque, and I was determined not to miss that. Now, if you haven't picked up on the general theme, if you're visiting Puerto Rico, please make sure that you check what you're doing in advance and are on time. These people will leave you and not waste a second feeling bad about it, because that's just, that's just how it is. In some places around the world, particularly in the mainland US, people will really be empathetic with you and try to help out in terms of getting you back on your reservation or whatever, but people in Puerto Rico and in Europe, they will really not care. So it's on you to make sure that you're on time and are ready to go. So after waiting for 3 hours, we finally did get on the ferry and made our way to Vieques. The ride was extremely bumpy and kind of scary, definitely some really rough waves. So if you're afraid of waves or being on the water, just keep that in mind. You may want to take a nap or try and find a different way over there with a plane. But after an hour, we arrived on the island, and we were hoping to be able to go to the beach and get some pictures by the bay. One of the representatives at the terminal had told us that the beaches were 24 hours. Of course, once we got there, we found out that that was out of the question as well. The lady in the ferry terminal was wrong, and they were not 24/7, so we couldn't even go see the bay at night, and we were pretty much just stranded on Vieques, which is a small island. If you don't know, there's no hospital, there's not much there. There's like 600 people, I think, who live on the island, so it's not much to do. Fortunately, we found out that there was a festival going on that night in the city center. So after making our way to the town center, we found a massive party with food, drinks, and even rides for kids. We spent about 3 hours total at this festival since there was nothing else to do. Gotta love the spontaneous nature of travel, right? After the party was over, it was time to head back to the ferry station where we had a 3-hour wait until the terminal opened. We pretty much just spent the night outside the station with a family of chickens who kept following us around. Eventually the terminal opened and it was time to make our way back to the mainland. After staying up all night, I was really exhausted and just decided to get some sleep on the ferry, so I didn't really get to see what the return trip looked like. We were actually on a different ferry this time. It was a more modern, updated one where you could actually go up top and see what the trip looked like. Once we arrived back on the mainland, I decided to head back to the Airbnb and just take a nap before day 5 got started because of how crazy everything was with day 4. That's where we'll end this first video at, since a lot happened in those first 4 days, and the second half of the trip had some more rental car craziness that will take way longer to talk about. I'll try to have that video out by the beginning of next week, so make sure you have notifications enabled and are subscribed so you see how things ended. With that said, thanks for watching. Everyone stay safe and have a great weekend.